Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Dear Diary, Lacey wrote, her handwriting a mix of neat cursive and hurried scrawls. Another day pretending to be someone I'm not. I wish I could tell them, Mom, Pierce, Ezra, Dalton, who I really am inside. But I'm scared. What if they don't understand? What if they reject me? Lacey paused, chewing on the end of her pen. She glanced at the clock on her nightstand, 11:45 p.m. The house was quiet, everyone else fast asleep. This was her time, the only moment she felt truly free to express herself. I saw a beautiful dress at the mall today, she continued writing. Soft pink with lace trim. I imagined myself wearing it, twirling in front of the mirror. For a moment, I felt, right? Like the person on the outside finally matched who I am on the inside. But then reality came crashing back. I'm trapped in this body that doesn't feel like mine. A tear splashed onto the page, smudging the ink. Lacey wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, and kept writing. Sometimes I wonder if God made a mistake. The pastor says he doesn't make mistakes, but then why do I feel this way? Why does my soul scream that I'm a girl when my body says otherwise? I pray every night for guidance, for acceptance, for the strength to be who I truly am, but the silence is deafening. The floorboards creaked outside her door. Lacey froze, her heart pounding. After a moment, footsteps retreated down the hallway. She let out a shaky breath and turned back to her diary. I love my family, but I'm terrified of disappointing them. Mom tries to understand. I can see it in her eyes sometimes. But Pierce, he's so set in his ways. And the church, they'd never accept me as I am. I feel like I'm suffocating, living a lie every day. Will I ever be free to be myself? Lacey closed the diary, hiding it beneath her mattress where she knew it would be safe. She turned off the lamp and lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be another day of pretending, of hiding her true self from the world. But for now, in the quiet of her room, she could dream of a future where she could live authentically, accepted and loved for who she truly was. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Lacey stirred. The house was already alive with activity, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the low murmur of the TV news, Dalton's music thumping from down the hall. She stretched, steeling herself for another day of navigating the complex waters of her identity in a world that didn't understand. Lacey dressed carefully, choosing baggy jeans and an oversized sweater that hid the curves she desperately wished weren't there. She ran a brush through her hair, which she'd been growing out despite Pierce's disapproving looks. It was a small act of defiance, a tiny step towards expressing her true self. "Breakfast!" Lissa's voice carried up the stairs. Taking a deep breath, Lacey descended to the kitchen. The familiar scent of coffee and toast filled the air. Ezra was already at the table, nose buried in a textbook. Dalton slouched in his chair, tapping away at his phone. Pierce stood by the counter, scanning the newspaper with a frown. "Morning, sweetie," Lissa said, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Lacey. Her smile was warm, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "Sleep well?" Lacey nodded, not trusting her voice. She picked at her food, hyper-aware of every movement, every glance. Did they suspect? Could they see the truth she was trying so hard to hide? "Big day at the church today," Pierce announced, folding his newspaper. "The youth group is having a car wash fundraiser. I expect you all to pitch in." Lacey's stomach clenched. The youth group, a constant reminder of the expectations placed upon her, the role she was supposed to fill. She mumbled an acknowledgement, avoiding Pierce's gaze. "Can't," Dalton said around a mouthful of toast. "Got band practice." Pierce's jaw tightened. "This is important, Dalton. The church community is not more important than my future," Dalton interrupted. "We've got a gig coming up. I can't miss practice." The tension in the room was palpable. Lacey shrunk in her seat, wishing she could disappear. These conflicts were becoming more frequent. Dalton pushing back against the strict religious environment, Pierce doubling down on his beliefs, and she was caught in the middle, her own internal struggle overshadowed by the family drama.
"I'll be there," Ezra piped up, ever the peacemaker. "I can help organize the younger kids." Pierce nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Ezra. At least someone understands the importance of community service." His gaze shifted to Lacey. "And you'll be there too, right, son?"
The word son hit Lacey like a physical blow. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to nod. "Yes, sir."
"Good,"
Pierce said, his tone softening slightly.
"It'll be good for you to spend time with the other young men in the congregation.
Maybe you'll even meet a nice girl." Lacey felt her cheeks burn. If only they knew how far off the mark that hope was. She mumbled an excuse and fled the table, rushing back to the safety of her room. Once alone, she leaned against the door, fighting back tears. How long could she keep living this lie? The weight of her secret felt crushing, suffocating. She longed to confide in someone, anyone, but the fear of rejection, of losing her family, kept her silent. Lacey's gaze fell on her diary, peeking out from beneath the mattress. With trembling hands, she retrieved it, flipping to a blank page. Writing was her only outlet, the only place she could truly be herself. "Another morning of pretending," she wrote. "Another day of sun and he and expectations I can never meet. I'm drowning in this life that doesn't fit. Will I ever find the courage to speak my truth?" Hours later, Lacey found herself at the church parking lot, half-heartedly scrubbing a minivan. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the scent of soap and hot asphalt filled the air. Around her, other members of the youth group laughed and joked, spraying each other with hoses and flicking soapy sponges. She felt like an outsider, disconnected from their carefree banter. How could she join in when every interaction felt like a lie? When every dude and bro tossed her way was a reminder of the chasm between how the world saw her and who she truly was. "Hey, you missed a spot," a voice called out. Lacey looked up to see Mark, one of the older boys in the youth group, grinning at her. He was tall, athletic, the kind of guy all the girls swooned over, and, Lacey had to admit, objectively attractive. But she felt none of the attraction she was supposed to feel. Just a complicated mix of envy and resentment. "Thanks," she mumbled, attacking the missed spot with perhaps more vigor than necessary. Mark leaned against the van, his posture relaxed. "So, you coming to the bonfire next weekend? It's gonna be awesome. My cousin's sneaking in some beers." Lacey's stomach churned. The thought of spending an evening pretending to be one of the guys, drinking beer she didn't like, laughing at jokes that made her uncomfortable, it was almost unbearable. But refusing would only raise questions, draw unwanted attention. "I'll try to make it," she said noncommittally, focusing intently on a particularly stubborn bit of dirt. Mark clapped her on the shoulder, the casual touch making her flinch. "Cool, man. It'll be good for you to get out more, you know? You're always so quiet." If only you knew why, Lacey thought. If only any of you could see the real me. The rest of the afternoon dragged on interminably. Lacey went through the motions, washing cars on autopilot while her mind wandered. She imagined a different life, one where she could wear pretty dresses without fear, where she could express herself freely, where the person in the mirror finally matched the person in her heart. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot, Pierce approached. He was beaming, clearly pleased with the day's turnout. "Great job, everyone," he called out. "The Lord smiles upon your hard work and dedication." His gaze fell on Lacey, and his smile softened. "I'm proud of you, son. You've really stepped up today." The praise, meant to be encouraging, felt like a knife twisting in Lacey's gut. She managed a weak smile, murmuring a thank you while inwardly crumbling. The disconnect between her inner truth and the persona she presented to the world had never felt more stark. That night, after a family dinner filled with forced smiles and stilted conversation, Lacey retreated once again to her room. She pulled out her diary, her lifeline in a world that didn't understand her. "I can't keep living like this," she wrote, tears smudging the ink. "Every day feels like a performance, a character I'm playing that isn't me. I want to scream my truth from the rooftops, but I'm terrified of the consequences. Will anyone ever truly see me? Will I ever be free to be Lacey, not just in these pages, but in the real world?" She paused, pen hovering over the paper. Then, with a burst of determination, she continued, "I've made a decision. I can't hide forever. Somehow, some way. I have to find the courage to be myself. It won't be easy, and I'm scared of what might happen. But living this lie is slowly killing me. I have to believe that there's a place for me in this world, a future where I can be the woman I know I am inside. I don't know how or when, but I'm going to find a way to make it happen. I have to. For my own sanity, for my own life. I am Lacey, and someday the whole world will know it." She closed the diary, feeling a mix of terror and exhilaration. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with obstacles and potential heartbreak. But for the first time in a long while, Lacey felt a glimmer of hope. She was taking the first step towards living her truth, and that alone was a victory. Days turned into weeks, and Lacey's resolve to live authentically grew stronger, even as the challenges mounted. She began taking small steps towards expressing her true identity, though always in secret. Online, she joined support groups for transgender individuals, finding solace in the stories of others who understood her struggles. In the privacy of her room, she experimented with makeup, practicing techniques she learned from YouTube tutorials. She even ordered a few feminine clothing items, hiding them in the back of her closet, only trying them on when she was absolutely certain she was alone. These small acts of self-expression were like air to a drowning person. For brief, precious moments, Lacey could see herself as she truly was. But the fear of discovery loomed large, casting a shadow over these private victories. One afternoon, while the rest of the family was out, Lacey seized the opportunity to fully embrace her identity. She locked her bedroom door, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. From the depths of her closet, she retrieved a simple summer dress she'd ordered weeks ago but hadn't dared to wear. The fabric was soft against her skin as she slipped it on. She applied makeup with trembling hands, following the steps she'd practiced countless times. Finally, she stood before the full-length mirror on her closet door, barely recognizing the person staring back at her. For the first time, the reflection matched the image in her mind. Tears welled up in her eyes as she twirled, watching the skirt flare out. This was her, the real Lacey, no longer hidden behind baggy clothes and forced masculinity. "I'm Lacey," she whispered to her reflection, voice choked with emotion. "This is who I am." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the moment. Panic seized Lacey as she realized her family had returned earlier than expected. She scrambled to change, frantically wiping off the makeup. In her haste, she knocked over a bottle of nail polish, leaving a bright pink stain on the carpet. No, she muttered, desperately trying to clean the spill. But it was too late. The stain had set, a glaring piece of evidence she couldn't hide. Footsteps approached her door. A knock. "Hey, you in there?" It was Ezra. "Just a minute," Lacey called out, voice higher than usual. She shoved the dress and makeup into the closet, threw on her usual clothes, and opened the door, praying her sister wouldn't notice anything amiss. Ezra's brow furrowed as she took in Lacey's flushed face and the lingering scent of perfume in the air. Her gaze fell to the pink stain on the carpet. "What happened in here?" I knocked over some paint," Lacey lied, the words feeling thick in her mouth. "Was working on a project." Ezra didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. "Mom wants help with dinner," she said instead. Lacey nodded, relieved to escape the room and the questions it might provoke. But as she followed Ezra downstairs, a heavy weight settled in her stomach. How long could she keep living this double life? The strain of constantly hiding, of suppressing her true self, was becoming unbearable. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Lacey poured her heart out in her diary. The pages became tear-stained as she wrote about the brief moment of joy she'd experienced seeing her true self in the mirror, followed by the crushing fear of almost being discovered.
"I can't go on like this," she wrote. "The lying, the hiding, it's tearing me apart. But I'm so scared of what will happen if they find out. Will they still love me? Will they throw me out? I don't know if I'm strong enough to face their rejection, but I don't know if I can survive much longer living this lie either." She closed the diary, hiding it in its usual spot beneath the mattress. As she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Lacey felt the walls of her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. Something had to give, and soon. The following days were a blur of anxiety and close calls. Lacey felt as though she was walking a tightrope, constantly on edge, terrified of slipping up and revealing her secret. She withdrew even further from her family and church community, avoiding conversations and interactions whenever possible. Her behavior didn't go unnoticed. Lissa began casting worried glances her way, trying to engage her in conversation. Even Dalton, usually absorbed in his own world of music and rebellion, seemed to sense something was off. It all came to a head one fateful afternoon. Lacey had just returned from a particularly difficult day at church where the pastor's sermon on God's plan and embracing one's true nature had felt like a personal attack. She retreated to her room, seeking solace in her diary. But as she reached for the familiar book, her blood ran cold. It wasn't in its usual hiding spot. Panic rising, she tore apart her room, searching desperately for the one place she'd been able to express her true self. A knock on the door froze her in her tracks. "Can we talk?"
It was Pierce's voice, uncharacteristically gentle. Lacey's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. With trembling hands, she opened the door to find not just Pierce, but Lissa as well. And in Lissa's hands was the diary.
"We need to have a family meeting,"
Pierce said, his expression unreadable. "Living room, 5 minutes." Lacey felt as though she was moving through molasses as she made her way downstairs. Her mind raced, trying to come up with explanations, excuses, anything to deflect from the truth that was about to come crashing down around her. In the living room, she found not just her immediate family, but also Pastor Matthews and 2 elders from the church. The gravity of the situation hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just a family discussion. It was an intervention.
"Sit down, son,"
Pierce said, gesturing to the lone chair facing the assembled group. Lacey sank into it, feeling small and exposed. Pastor Matthews cleared his throat.
"We're here because we're concerned about you," he began. "Your parents brought some troubling writings to my attention. We want to help you through this confusion you're experiencing." Lacey's gaze darted to the diary, clutched tightly in Lissa's hands. Her most private thoughts, her deepest truths, laid bare for all to see. She felt naked, vulnerable in a way she'd never experienced before. "It's not confusion," she whispered, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "It's who I am." A heavy silence fell over the room. Pierce's face darkened while Lissa looked on the verge of tears. Ezra and Dalton, clearly uncomfortable, avoided eye contact. "Son," Pierce said, his voice strained, "this is just a phase. You've been led astray by the secular world, by dangerous ideas that go against God's plan. But we're here to guide you back to the right path." The words hit Lacey like physical blows. She'd imagined this scenario countless times, but the reality was far more painful than she'd anticipated. The rejection, the denial of her very identity, cut deep. "It's not a phase," she said, voice growing stronger. "I've felt this way my entire life. I'm a woman. My name is Lacey." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Pastor Matthews leaned forward, his expression a mix of concern and disapproval. "Young man, these feelings you're having are a test from God. We must pray for strength to overcome them." Lacey felt a spark of anger ignite within her.
Years of suppression, of hiding, of denying her true self. It all came rushing to the surface. "No," she said, standing up. "I'm not confused. I'm not being tested. This is who I am, who I've always been. I'm a woman, and my name is Lacey." The room erupted into chaos, Pierce's face contorted with anger and disbelief.
"No son of mine,"
he began, but Lacey cut him off. "I'm not your son," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your daughter, and if you can't accept that, then maybe I don't belong here anymore." With those words, Lacey turned and ran from the room, ignoring the shouts behind her. She raced up the stairs, slamming her bedroom door shut and collapsing onto her bed. The weight of what had just happened crashed over her in waves. Her secret was out. There was no going back now. The road ahead was uncertain and terrifying, but for the first time in her life, Lacey felt a strange sense of freedom. The truth, painful as it was, had finally been spoken aloud. As she lay there, sobs racking her body, Lacey knew that her life would never be the same. But amidst the fear and heartache, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life. She had taken the first step towards living as her true self. Whatever came next, she would face it as Lacey. No more hiding, no more pretending. The aftermath of Lacey's revelation was a whirlwind of emotion and conflict. The house became a battleground of heated arguments and tense silences. Pierce retreated into rigid denial, refusing to acknowledge Lacey's identity and doubling down on his religious convictions. Lissa oscillated between confusion, grief, and tentative attempts at understanding. Ezra and Dalton, caught in the crossfire, reacted in their own ways. Ezra threw herself into research, poring over books and articles about gender identity in an attempt to make sense of her siblings' revelation. Dalton, in a surprising show of support, stood up to Pierce during one particularly heated argument, declaring that he'd rather have a sister than lose a sibling to bigotry. For Lacey, the days blurred together in a haze of tears and uncertainty. She alternated between moments of fierce pride in finally living her truth and crushing despair at the fractures in her family. The church community, once a source of comfort, now felt suffocating. Whispers followed her wherever she went, judgment and misunderstanding evident in every sideways glance. A week after the confrontation, Pastor Matthews arranged for Lacey to begin counseling sessions with a Christian therapist. The sessions were grueling, filled with attempts to correct her thinking and steer her back to her God-given gender. Lacey endured them, knowing that refusing would only escalate the already tense situation at home. But in the privacy of her room, Lacey continued to embrace her true self. She reached out to online support groups, finding solace in the stories of others who had walked similar paths. Through these connections, she learned about resources for transgender individuals, hormone therapy options, and the legal process of changing one's name and gender marker. As the weeks passed, small shifts began to occur within the family dynamic. Lissa, driven by maternal love and a desire to understand, started attending a support groups. Though still struggling, she made efforts to use Lacey's chosen name and pronouns, each attempt a balm to Lacey's wounded heart. Ezra became a fierce ally, defending Lacey against Pierce's continued denial and the church's attempts at correction. She helped Lacey research transgender-friendly therapists and doctors, quietly gathering information for the future. Even Dalton, in his own way, showed support. He invited Lacey to band practice, introducing her as his sister without hesitation. The simple act of acceptance from her brother and his friends was a bright spot in the storm of family conflict. Pierce remained the most significant obstacle. His love for his child warred with his deeply ingrained beliefs, resulting in a cold distance that hurt Lacey more than outright rejection. Family dinners became tense affairs, punctuated by pointed silences and aborted attempts at conversation. Despite the challenges at home, Lacey found strength in finally living authentically. She began to express her gender identity more openly, growing out her hair and experimenting with subtle makeup. Each small step towards presenting as her true self felt like a victory, even as it drew more attention and gossip from the community. 3 months after her coming out, Lacey made a decision that would change the course of her life. With Ezra's help, she found a gender-affirming therapist in a nearby city. The first session was revelatory. For the first time, Lacey felt truly seen and understood by a mental health professional. The therapist helped Lacey navigate the complex emotions surrounding her identity and family situation. Together, they developed coping strategies and a plan for moving forward with her transition, both medically and socially. It was after one of these sessions that Lacey found the courage to have a heart-to-heart conversation with Lissa. They sat in the car outside the therapist's office, the engine off, a heavy silence between them. "Mom," Lacey began, her voice trembling. "I know this is hard for you, but I need you to understand. This isn't a choice. It's who I am, who I've always been. I'm still the same person you raised, just finally being honest about who that person is." Lissa was quiet for a long moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I won't pretend I understand everything, but you're my child and I love you. I'm trying, Lacey. I promise I'm trying." The use of her chosen name brought fresh tears to Lacey's eyes. She reached out, taking her mother's hand. "That's all I can ask for," she whispered. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. As they drove home, Lacey felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, with time and patience, her family could come to accept her for who she truly was. The road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be more confrontations with Pierce, more judgment from the church community, more battles to fight. But for the first time since she'd begun this journey, Lacey felt like she could see a future where she could live as her authentic self, surrounded by people who loved and accepted her. As they pulled into the driveway, Lacey took a deep breath. She was Lacey, daughter, sister, woman, and she was ready to face whatever came next, standing proudly in her truth. Years passed, bringing with them both challenges and triumphs. Lacey's journey of self-discovery and transition was not an easy one, but with each passing day, she grew more comfortable in her own skin. The family dynamics continued to evolve. Lissa became Lacey's strongest advocate, fiercely defending her daughter against judgment and misconceptions. Ezra and Dalton remained steadfast allies, their unwavering support a constant source of strength. Pierce's journey to acceptance was slower and more fraught. There were heated arguments, periods of silence, and painful confrontations, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The love for his child, buried beneath layers of fear and misunderstanding, slowly emerged. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but rather a series of small steps, a pronoun used correctly here, a tentative question about Lacey's well-being there. Lacey found her place in the world beyond the confines of her small town. She moved to a larger city where she could access better resources for her transition and find a community that accepted her without question. She pursued her education, throwing herself into her studies with a passion born of finally being able to live authentically. The church that had once been the center of their family life faded into the background. Lacey found a more accepting spiritual community, one that embraced her identity and celebrated her journey. Some members of her old congregation reached out in support, while others maintained their distance. Lacey learned to find peace with the fact that not everyone would understand or accept her, focusing instead on those who stood by her side. Through it all, Lacey's diary remained her constant companion. The tear-stained pages that had once held her deepest secrets now chronicled her triumphs, her first day presenting fully as herself in public, the start of hormone therapy, legally changing her name. Each entry was a testament to her resilience and growth. On a crisp autumn day, 5 years after her coming out, Lacey found herself back in her hometown. She stood outside a small cafe, heart pounding with anticipation. This meeting had been years in the making, fraught with uncertainty and hope. A familiar figure approached, older now, with more gray in his hair, but unmistakable. Lacey's father, the man she had once known as her mother's ex-husband, now stood before her. "Lacey," he said, his voice rough with emotion. You look beautiful." Tears sprang to Lacey's eyes as she took in the man she hadn't seen since childhood. "Dad," she whispered. They embraced, years of absence and unspoken words passing between them. When they pulled apart, both had damp eyes.
"I'm sorry,"
her father said, the words carrying the weight of decades.
"I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand."
Lacey nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They made their way into the cafe, settling into a quiet corner booth. Over steaming cups of coffee, they began the long process of reconnecting, of building a relationship based on truth and acceptance. "I want you to know," her father said, reaching across the table to take her hand,
"that I love you. You're my daughter, and I'm proud of the woman you've become."
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.